a nose. Moonraker, released in 1979 and is directed by Lewis Gilbert, who has directed such films like Reach for the Sky and other James Bond films of You Only Live Twice and The Spy Who Loved Me. And this film is starring Roger Moore returning to his role as James Bond and Lois Chiles as Dr. Goodhead. I forgot how amazing these names in the James Bond series are. Dr. Goodhead. 7 years. 7 years of college for that. Right on. The Moonraker shuttle has been hijacked under MI6's nose. So to investigate what happened to the Moonraker shuttle, they enlist the greatest secret agent known to mankind, James Bond 007. And to begin his investigation, he heads out to California, USA, to first interrogate the head of the shuttle creation, Hugo Drax. But this is a James Bond flick, so something is definitely amiss when it comes to Mr. Drax and his organization. Come to find out, he is building a massive space station in space. And there he plans on wiping out the entire human race on the planet so that everyone that he selected to join him on the space station can reign supreme. So at this time, in 1979, this is the 11th James Bond film to be released. So I guess when you're in a franchise for that long, you start thinking of ideas of what to do with your star character. And the idea, or the big idea, in every franchise, I think is, well, let's put him in space. Did it with Jason. Did it with the Leprechaun. Looks like they're going to be doing it with the Fast and the Furious crew. I think Tom Cruise is going to be doing it for Mission Impossible. Let's put James Bond in space! Plus, around this time, there was a big space craze with, I don't know if you've heard of this little film called Star Wars, but, you know, a couple years before this, it was like, hey, space is a pretty big thing right now. Let's put James Bond in space. And also 2001: A Space Odyssey, Star Trek, all of these space adventures. It seemed like the natural thing to do of putting one of the biggest cinematic characters of all time in space. Now, I do enjoy this movie and the whole James Bond franchise. I haven't seen it in so long, and I remember the first time watching it, looking through my parents' VHS tapes, just all of the recordable ones, and seeing this blank one that said Moonraker. I didn't know what that was, and I put it in, and it's the whole James Bond movie that they recorded on TV one day, probably back in the 80s before I was born. Awesome for me. I'm like, yeah, I love James Bond. Never seen this one before. Let's check it out. And of course, again, James Bond is in space, so I love this one. It also led to a pretty good and usable gun in the GoldenEye game in the 90s. From what I remember, it was pretty powerful, and you could kill your enemy pretty quickly, but it didn't have the satisfaction of the noise. It just had the little pew, pew, pew. So that wasn't really fun shooting, but I remember you could take out a couple of people with that, with just a couple of shots, not constant fire. So Roger Moore as James Bond. He's definitely regarded as one of the best Bonds, in my opinion. I don't know if I put him above Sean Connery. Sean Connery was the original, and he's just so iconic in that role, but when we get to Roger Moore, he's an actual Englishman, and he's so refined, and he's so sophisticated that it's hard to compare the two, but I may put Roger Moore above Sean Connery. Not entirely sure. That's not definitive, that's just me just remembering my childhood and all the Bonds that I used to watch. Typically, I would watch the Roger Moore Bonds over the Connery Bonds. Now, as a young kid or a young pubescent teenager, watching these James Bond films, especially, you know, in the 70s, when more skin was being revealed and they were just throwing in all of these, whether they were like really attractive models or Playboy models, into these films because we needed more beautiful women in here. Young me was like, yes, keep doing that, please. Whatever you need to do, just put more of these hot women in these films and reveal as much of their skin as possible. As a matured adult, though, going back and watching these movies, the sexism and the misogyny is so apparent, and yeah, the word disgusting comes to mind. And that's what these Roger Moore James Bond films became, right? It was, hey, we have this plot, and let's to move James Bond along, let's give him a different woman in every single scene, give him a little one-liner, and he'll get to have sex with them. And all of these women are so weak-willed and weak-minded that they just succumb to James Bond every single time. So I could see, if you've never seen a James Bond film before and you go back and watch these older ones, if you're offended, if you're disgusted by them, I definitely understand where you're coming from, and you are definitely not wrong. To me, though, I have nostalgia with this film and all of these James Bond films, because that's what we used to do as a family, or at least with my dad, when they had James Bond marathons all the time on the weekends. We would sit down and watch them after, working on the house or doing chores, and sit down and watch whatever James Bond film was on screen at that time. Now, back then, I believed that Roger Moore's James Bond could take on anyone and win, but again, looking back from a mature side, looking at Roger Moore and the people that he went up against fighting hand-to-hand combat, I'm like, really? Really? We're staging it so that this guy, this elderly British gentleman, was able to take out a man wielding a kendo stick? Interesting. And also come to realize that this film's plot is very, I guess, convenient for MI6, because if Drax hadn't stolen this shuttle, he would have just quietly sent all of his other shuttlecrafts up into space, and his plan would have worked. But the hubris of this villain was his downfall. Look after Mr. Bond. See that some harm comes to him. This actor who plays Drax is freaking terrible. I love his introduction too, and I realized this even back when I was a kid. This introduction is god-awful. He's sitting in this big, this mansion, this huge-ass room, and he's playing the grand piano, and he's playing this beautiful piece, and the camera comes in and zooms in on his hands, on the keys, but he's not playing, he's just doing this, and the music is going, the fingers should be moving a lot, but here he is just going, and the director thought, yes, it's a good idea, let's take the camera and zoom in right on his hands while the music is playing, and then pan out to see Drax and introduce him to the world. That is so smart. In the grand ranking of all the James Bond films, I'm not sure where this one would rank, and I'm actually thinking about doing a whole ranking video for the release of the newest James Bond film that was supposed to come out last year and is coming out, I believe, this October, at least as of this recording. It's coming out in October. It will probably change because the release date has changed like 10 different times already. So I may have to rank them all, which is going to be one freaking big chore. I think this one would rank in the top third for me, just out of nostalgia base, and also as space. I love space. Now, the science that they're issuing here as to what happens in space, and the hair is not floating, and to simulate that there's zero gravity, you can just see them standing on their toes and walking along. Back then, yes, I'm sure it was fine, but now it's like, no. No. We also have another appearance of Jaws in this film, who I can't remember the first film that he made an appearance in. It's been so long since I've seen them, but I remember him snapping the ski lift cords and cables with his mouth and then coming after them in this movie. Yay. And I think this movie also inspired the climax of Point Break. Guy with a parachute jumps out of a plane, and then James Bond is pushed out by Jaws, and he's not wearing a parachute, so he dives and takes the parachute off of the guy who's falling, and James Bond is safe. That's basically the climax of Point Break, right, Keanu? Fuck yeah! Okay. Is this movie cheesy as hell? Absolutely. I think this was the point in the James Bond franchise where things were getting a little out of hand, and they were going more for the one-liners and the cheesiness as opposed to, I don't know, some sophisticated type spy movie. But to me, for nostalgia's sake, I think this movie is a really fun time. And for any James Bond fan, I think they would like this movie too, if you haven't watched it in several years. Newer viewers, I mean, you could probably skip this and deal with the Daniel Craig and maybe the Pierce Brosnan and James Bond. Those are much more realistic than this one. I'm going to give Moonraker 3 out of 5 Blu-rays.
Not exactly what I had in mind, but not bad.
Alright, everyone, now because my favorite part of my video is where I randomly select which movie I'm going to be watching next, so let's take a look. Boondock Saints. Oh boy. In nomine Patri, et Filii, et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. I remember my friends in high school saying, you gotta check this one out. This movie is so badass. And I remember thinking it was a pretty badass film, but I have not watched it really since then. And I've seen other reviewers on YouTube talk about Boondock Saints, saying how shit of a script and how shit of a movie it is. But I don't remember that. Be interesting to check it out next time. If any of you have recommendations of films that you want me to review on here, you can leave a recommendation below this video, or go to my Facebook page, my Instagram, or my Twitter, leave your recommendation there, and if I have access to it, I will watch, review it, and give you a shout on the channel. And if you want me to do your recommendation as quickly as I possibly can and bypass the whole random generator that I have here, you can make a PayPal donation on the main page of my YouTube channel. Any size donation will do, just attach your movie with the donation, and if I have access to it, I will watch it and publish my review of it as quickly as I possibly can. So guys, if you've seen Moonraker, what did you think about it? Where does it rank in your ranking of all the James Bond films, if you have a ranking for yourself? Whatever you thought, comment below, let me know what you thought about it. And as always, if you like what you see here, if you like my take on movies, then hit the subscribe button, and make sure you hit that bell so you'll know the next time I release my next movie review. So guys, I will see you next time with my review of Boondock Saints. So in the meantime, be well, be good to each other, and go watch a movie. Take care, guys.